stomach a little. Not that he was greedy, but that the greed wore the costume of decency, of family taking care of family, while the actual family member at the center of it poured tea alone on Wexler Road and had no idea her grandchildren were dividing the roof over her head. I found out at a barbecue that the three of them had already met with a realtor named Cindy from a brokerage out by the highway. Met with her, walked the property, talked square footage and comps and a quick close, while Opal was at her hair appointment so she wouldn't see the car in the drive. They'd timed it around her schedule. That's when I stopped thinking of this as a disagreement and started thinking of it as a thing being done to someone. To my grandmother. Behind a locked door of her own life. I didn't tell Derek what I knew. I didn't tell any of them. I went home, and I opened my laptop, and I typed in an address I'd known by heart since I was 7 years old. But before any of that, I drove out to tell Opal. I thought I'd be breaking the news. I had the whole gentle speech ready, the one you give before you hand someone a grief. She was on the porch when I pulled up, light already on, the kettle already singing through the screen door. I sat down. I told her, as softly as I could, that Mom and Dad wanted to sell the house and move her to Maple Crest. I watched her face for the crack I was dreading. It didn't come. She reached for the pot and poured, slow and even, and the spoon touched the china with that small clean sound. "I know, honey," she said. Just that, and the bottom dropped out of my whole careful speech. I asked how she knew. She smiled, not bitterly, more like a woman who'd seen the weather coming for a while. "Cindy left her card in the door," she said, "and your mother's been measuring my rooms when she thinks I'm napping. I'm 89, I'm not asleep." I started to tell her we'd fight it, that I'd find a way, and she put her hand over mine. Her hand was cool and dry and absolutely steady. "Come by Tuesday," was all she said. "Just you. Have your tea first." Then she changed the subject to the tomatoes. I drove home unsettled in a way I couldn't name. I'd come to comfort a frightened old woman and found, instead, somebody calmer than I was. People don't get calm like that from being helpless. They get it from being ready. I just didn't know yet what she was ready for. The clock started that same week. My parents weren't waiting for anybody's blessing. Cindy the realtor scheduled a formal walkthrough and a comp appraisal for the following Monday. My mother booked the Maple Crest tour for the family and put my name on it without asking. The way she'd been putting my name on her plans. My whole life. I got the calendar invite at work and stared at it between drafting 2 trust amendments for clients I'd never met, families who'd done the careful thing years early so nobody would have to fight in a hurry. The irony sat on my desk like a paperweight. My parents had set their plan moving at speed, and speed was their whole advantage. A hurried family steamrolls a careful one because care takes time and steamrollers don't. I knew that. I'd watched it happen to strangers across a conference table. I just never thought I'd be the careful one standing in the road. That weekend, a small white sign went up at the end of the drive on Wexler Road. "Coming soon," it said, with Cindy's smiling photo and a phone number. I happened to be there when the sign man pounded it in, because I'd started coming by more, watching the house the way you watch a stove you don't trust. Opal came to the front window with her cup in her hand. She looked at the sign, and then she looked at me, and she did the last thing I expected. She smiled. Not a sad smile. A patient one. The kind you give a card player who's just bet everything on a hand he hasn't seen. Then she lifted her cup an inch, like a toast, and went back inside to her tea. I tried the reasonable route first, because I'm a person who tries the reasonable route first, even when I already suspect it's a dead end. I called my mother and asked, plainly, whether they'd talked to an elder law attorney before listing the house, whether they understood how Medicaid look-back worked, how the sale could actually cost more than it cleared. I used my work voice, calm and specific, the voice I use to keep clients from doing something they'll grieve. My mother heard concern as obstruction. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Serena," she said. "Everything's handled. Your father's been thorough." Thorough. My father, who refinanced a refinance. I asked who held my grandmother's power of attorney, and there was a pause on the line, the kind that tells you you've touched the thing they hoped you wouldn't ask about. "Your father does," she said. "For her finances. So this is all perfectly legal, before you start." Then she hung up. Not angry. Just done. The way you end a call with a telemarketer. I sat there with the dead phone and felt the reasonable route close behind me. They weren't going to slow down. They weren't going to ask Opal. They had a power of attorney and a realtor and a deadline, and they were sure that was enough, because they'd never had reason to learn that it might not be. So I did the thing I do when talking stops working. I did what I do at work. I stopped asking people what was true and went and looked it up myself. I opened my laptop that night, logged into the county recorder's portal the same way I did a dozen times a day for clients, and I pulled the record on the house at the end of Wexler Road. The record loaded slow, the way old county scans do. I knew this property's history in my bones, or thought I did. Earl and Opal Holt, joint, since 1961. What I expected was a clean chain ending with Opal as sole owner after Earl passed. What I got stopped me cold. There was a more recent instrument on the file, recorded about 6 years back, the spring after the funeral. The index line called it a deed, with a reservation of a life estate. The scan itself was partial on the public portal, the second page cut off the way these old uploads sometimes are, but the index summary listed 2 names in the grantee field. One was Opal's. The other was cut off at the margin, just a first initial and the start of a surname I couldn't quite read. I sat very still. A reservation of life estate. I drafted those at work. I knew exactly what it meant in shape, even before I could read the names. It meant that at some point, quietly, the ownership of that house had been rearranged. It meant Opal had kept the right to live there for the rest of her life. That was the life estate, hers to hold until her last day. And it meant the remainder, the ownership that takes over after, had been deeded to somebody else. Somebody whose name started with a letter I couldn't see. My father held a financial power of attorney, but a power of attorney lets you act for what a person owns. It doesn't conjure ownership that was given away years before you ever got the paperwork. I closed the laptop and just breathed for a minute. Then I opened it again to make sure I'd read it right. I had. Whatever was on that deed, my parents either didn't know or didn't believe it mattered, because the pressure on Opal only got worse. They came on a Saturday to start getting organized, which meant my mother wrapping the good plates in newspaper and my father pacing the rooms with a tape measure he didn't need. They spoke about Opal in front of Opal as if she'd already left. "We'll donate most of this. The bedroom set might be worth something. She won't need all these dishes at Maple Crest." My grandmother sat in her chair by the window through all of it, hands folded, watching them sort her 60 years like a yard sale. I came by mid-morning and found Cindy the realtor in the kitchen taking listing photos, angling her phone to make the small rooms look big. And here is the thing I will never forget. Opal got up, went to the stove, and put the kettle on. She made tea. For Cindy. For the woman photographing her home for strangers. She poured a cup and set it down by the sink with that small clean clink of spoon on china, and she said, "You'll work better with something warm in you, dear." Cindy didn't know what to do with that. None of them did. My mother frowned like the courtesy was a kind of trick, and maybe it was. Because watching my grandmother pour tea for the people dismantling her life, perfectly calm, perfectly polite, I finally understood that her calm wasn't surrender. It was a held breath. It was a woman standing in the eye of a storm she had personally arranged, waiting for the wind to turn. I just had to wait with her, and trust that she knew the date the wind was coming. That afternoon, after they'd gone, Opal and I had our real tea, the 4 o'clock kind, just us on the porch with the light on though it was still day. She told me about Earl and the house. I'd heard pieces over the years, but she told it whole that day, like she wanted it on the record in me. How they'd bought the half-acre for almost nothing in 61. How Earl had built it slow because they could only afford materials a paycheck at a time. How a man from the bank had once tried to talk Earl into a second mortgage to fund some scheme, and Earl had walked him to the door. "Your grandfather had one rule about this house," she said, looking out at the yard he'd graded by hand. "He used to say a house should outlast the people who try to take it." She said it lightly, but she was watching me when she said it, to see if it landed. It landed. I asked her, careful, whether she and Earl had ever changed anything about how the